It is important when killing a nun to ensure that you bring an army of sufficient size. For Sister Thorn of the Sweet Mercy Convent, Lanotaxis brought 200 men.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Reading Crossbow podcast. My name is Lana, and I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey Lana, and I'm excited to talk to you this week about my pick for February, which was Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. And this was a pretty exciting book. I mean, you just heard the opening line of this book, and that's an exciting start to this story.
I almost texted you when I read that line, like, what the hell, Rob? What am I stepping into? Like, I knew in that moment, like, I am going on a journey. Like, get my tea, get my blankie, this book. I like tell everyone in the house, leave me alone. Like, I'm in it.
Yeah, this was a very different book. I was excited to read another Mark Lawrence with you. The last one that we read, which was the first book in the library series, was actually a very kind of, to me, it was almost a heartwarming type of story. It wasn't nearly the grimdark that was the Broken Empire series, which you haven't read yet. Well, we'll probably have to hold that one off for a little bit.
Of course.
But
well, yeah, and on the Mark Lawrence journey, I didn't like that book as much as you did, the book that wouldn't burn. I didn't dislike it. Like, there was parts of it I enjoyed immensely, and the writing was great. So I was ready, at this point, because it's been nearly a year, if not a year, that it's since we've read Mark Lawrence. So it's like right on time for me to start a new one.
Yeah, and this is just a few years old. The series is complete. It's a 3-book series. There's actually a sequel series set in the same world, but they're not really, the two series are not closely tied, so you can actually read them in any order. But for this book, which is the first book of the Ancestor series, so Red Sister is actually more of a dark fantasy or dark academia compared to, and not necessarily a grim dark.
Yeah, I think it did get pretty grimdark, towards the end, which we'll talk about. But it was definitely foreboding. It definitely like had that like shadowy beginning. So like I knew we were gonna get into some of the grim. It was far bloodier than I expected, because sometimes with grimdark you don't always get the blood. You just get like, oh, I don't even know how to describe it because I haven't read as much as you have. But like it's just sad. I don't know another word, but like, yeah, way more bloodier than I thought, but also, way better than I thought. So like, I'm super excited to dig into this. So, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the book?
So Red Sister by Mark Lawrence starts off with Nona Gray as she's being led to the gallows for the murder of a nobleman's son, as a nun from Sweet Mercy Convent basically comes in, sweet talks the guards, and basically spirits Nona off back to her convent on the day of her execution. And the rest of this book is really Nona's journey as she not only comes to understand what this group of warrior, assassin, and holy nuns do, but also as readers, we come to understand how she got to the gallows in the first place. So this book really is this journey of Nona as she learns about the convent and its traditions of warrior nuns and holy witches and dark shadow assassins. This is not your typical convent, and Nona is just one of many of the latest batch of recruits, all trying to test themselves and learn how to become nuns in this world. This is a very different kind of story. Would you describe it as a more adult, like dark Harry Potter?
Ooh, Harry Potter's not what came to mind when I was reading this. Not at
Okay.
all. But yes, adult, dark, it more so than I thought it was going to be. I'm actually really glad that this book took such a mature turn, because I have forced us into reading so much like new adult romantasy. And you've actually given us some young adult fantasy lately too, like just kind of by accident we picked up these books. We did need something a bit more mature, but when I was reading this I got more Mistborn vibes, so I'll probably make a lot of comparisons to Mistborn. Didn't
Okay.
get Harry Potter at all. Too much murder, stabby stabby.
And I went that way because a good portion of this book does revolve around Nona attending classes where she's learning about the mystic arts and the
True.
and even potion making and poison making, which very much kind of reminded me, especially of the early Harry Potter books.
I guess the reason I didn't put that together is just because of this great religious aspect with it. The whole time there's like mean, scary nuns that have like scary names too, like Sister Talon, like, you know, and the one that they call oh, they have different names for all of them, and they have like names that they say behind their backs too. So it was just like, to me that felt more scary. I never felt like I was in like the wizarding world of Harry Potter, even though
No.
you're totally right. I should have
Yeah.
made that
Well,
connection.
I mean, one of the nuns basically spends most of the book trying to poison the children.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's
uh,
fantastic.
and just when you think, oh, she's done poisoning everyone, not it's time to poison them some more. Even like the kids, they have a what they call the sanitarium where they go when they get hurt, and they seem like they get hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are child soldiers of sorts being raised, and it's kind of messed up.
It is, but it's also wickedly entertaining. And you know, part of the reason I also didn't feel very Harry Potterish, and I just want to address this too, is, and this will end up in my dislikes. We're starting a new format today a little bit, where we're gonna start off the show with what we loved about a book, you know, what we liked about a book. And then we're gonna go into what we didn't like about the book. Who's the book for? You know, if there's a map, we'll talk about it. We've never really done spice ratings, so we're gonna do that now, and magic ratings, right? We've done similar formats before, but this is just a little bit different. I kind of like where we're going, but there's a part that I don't like, but I'm going to mention it now, which is Mark Lawrence writes very mature. So I didn't get the childlike aspect out of it as much, but we'll touch on that later. So how about we get into what we loved about this book? Like, let's lead with that. Let's tell people, why should you read this book? What's great about it?
For me, one of the things I most liked about this book is it is very much subversive of your normal fantasy tropes. For example, in this book there is a prophesied chosen one, and it's not the main character. And that's kind of the way this book goes, is whenever you see normal fantasy tropes, it generally takes a hard left from the normal path that you would expect in this kind of a fantasy.
On that path, like, they talk about paths, they talk about threads, they talk about a lot of that in this book with how the just general magic is weaved. And I feel like Mark Lawrence really weaved his own web with this book, just connected everything so very, very well. You're talking about those paths, we're talking about those threads. It's all connected. The whole book, like from the very, very first sentence, wondering why that child is at the gallows. Like, he takes his time and he weaves it. And you get little bits here, little bits there, and it all connects. And at the very kind of towards the end, we get all the pieces together. And I feel like he didn't leave anything out. Like, if there was something missing, I didn't catch it. Just very well put together.
And this is set in a very different kind of world where, as the sun is slowly dying and getting colder, the polar ice caps are just expanding until they basically gotten to the equator. And the entire population of humanity is living in a 50-mile wide strip around the equator of this world. That's all that's left that's habitable. Even there's a bunch of post-apocalyptic elements to this story, kind of like your Shannara books, where there is future technology in this world, just no one really knows what it is. There's a moon that's really just a solar mirror that's reflecting down, and that's why this one strip is not frozen, because this solar mirror is basically just heating up that one strip as it circles the world. And They don't know how it works. They have no idea. Their ancestors were the ones who set that up when they colonized this world long ago. So, like I said, this kind of reminds me of books like Shannara, where it's set in a dystopian, post apocalyptic world, and these are people just trying to survive in a dark world. And I really enjoy that kind of story because it focuses instead on character.
Yeah, Rob's picks here. Dark World, check. Dark Academia, check. Poison Master, check. We hit all the boxes. I'm gonna save some of my comments for setting for later. They hit a different part of the show for me. Sorry, Rob. But yeah, some other things I liked about this book is the character development was really, really great. And I think we'll probably both share that. I just have a feel that you will. But this is children, going to a school at a convent. We love our dark academia here on this show. We just cannot seem to get away from it. And we age with them. We age with them over about 4 years, I think it is. They go through a couple of different classes at the convent. Those two classes being red class and gray class. And just different aspects of the schooling. Red being like the warriors. There's different paths of training there, and you're going to end up in one of them. And I don't remember all of them, but there's basically the ones who can control magic. Those who are going to end up being holy sisters, like you said, holy witches, and those who are like sisters of discretion. They can use stealth and shadow magic, things like that. Really cool. And I actually don't even think we have to tell everybody all of those necessarily. They're at the beginning of the book. Like, it tells you in case you need to look back at them, and I reference that quite a bit. Red class, gray, mystic, and holy class. But we follow these girls, and the characters are very, very well done. And we have girls of different ages, because there's some girls that are in other classes, and then they all shift to the classes at the same time. There's no like normal matriculation. It's like when you're ready, you advance up, and I think you might have to be a certain age. Although the ages in here say it's varied. But anyhow, so we follow a lot of girls, and I didn't feel that confused. They were introduced into the storyline at a good pace. And then we even had some characters that stayed from the very beginning of the main character's story, Nona's story, all the way back from like the gallows, and where she stayed through that whole process all the way to the end. And I didn't feel lost. And we're coming fresh off reading books like Onyx Storm, where so many characters were introduced in the beginning, and I was just like trying so hard to figure out who they were. I was lost.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think this book primarily is that character story. This is, funny enough, I think the strongest theme of this book is friendship, and the friendship that these children have with each other as they're going through this sometimes brutal but sometimes exciting training. Just these friendships that they're forming and how these friendships change really is the heart of this story. It's not your This is not your epic fantasy where there's a giant evil god off in the distance that's destroying everything. It's like, no, this is a story focus like laser focused on this very small group of individuals in a very dark world. And those are some of my favorite types of books.
Yeah, it had that, it needed that element too, because like I said, it does get bloody, it does get gory, it is dark. And the main character says like softly at times, like, friend? Like, are you a friend? Like, and she counts her friends as she goes along, adds them to her list. The other thing I liked about this book is just how, for me, how believable it was. So we're in, I would call this epic grimdark fantasy, just because of how big the world building is. And of course it's grimdark and it's fantasy, but very believable. Sometimes I have to have that suspension of disbelief that we've talked about when reviewing other books, where it's like, okay, I'm going to ignore that. Like that doesn't make sense to me, but we accept it. So what I liked about this book is we have this somewhat complicated plot of, we've talked about the convent, but we haven't really talked about the prophecy. So some of these girls are going to fulfill a prophecy, and this is with a chosen one and the people who must guard her. And, we don't exactly know what they're necessarily meant for. We get little pieces of that, where maybe there's some artifacts left on this world, that do something once united or put together or have another purpose that we don't know yet. This is a trilogy, and we've just barely gotten into it. But what stood out to me was at one point in the book, the nuns actually say, one of them says, well, I don't believe in the prophecy. Well, she's a nun at the church. And then later on, it's like, well, if the prophecy's true. So it gives you this moment of like, kind of just how the world works. Some people just believe in things because they want to believe in something. They need to believe in something because their world is so grim. Like you said, they live in this like swath of habitable earth. Well, not earth, wherever they are. And I just found that very real, that Mark Lawrence took the time to say, like, this is what I'm building, but I'm also letting you know there's cracks in what I'm building naturally with how these people believe. And that just made it feel more like I can accept whatever's thrown at me. Maybe that's a fail safe. Maybe he's a genius. He's like built in this fail safe if he messes up. I don't know, but it was great.
Yeah, and you mentioned how like some of the nuns don't necessarily believe in the prophecy, but they would even say it doesn't matter if you believe because other people believe. And because other people believe, that makes the fact that this person is the chosen one, that makes it important because people do believe.
It's freaking brilliant is what it is. Like the whole time I'm reading this and they're saying things like that, like you said, like it doesn't matter, right? It matters to the people. We represent the church. This is our job, and doing this gives them hope. Like that, it's brilliant. Like, and I did not think I was going to shout Mark Lawrence in this book, because I am definitely going to put him back down, knock him off that pedestal a little bit later. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I loved that. For people who are wanting to get into a book with really good depth, people who watch our show, maybe you found us because of our reviews of Fourth Wing or Mistborn. Mistborn's a great example though, but if you're looking to go really deep, a lot of richness in a book, great writing, then this is absolutely it.
Yeah, this is a wonderfully told book. It has very good messages even within this story, while at the same time being an incredibly dark and trying tale for the people in this world. So Nona and her classmates, they go through this training, and even where they're being sent into basically fighting pits. And it's like, well, you might die in this one. Good luck. Don't embarrass the church. Like, it's... And the fighting pits, the people on the other side are other child slaves that are being forced to fight. That's the kind of darkness of this world where, because the world is dying, a lot of normal, what we would think of as morality or ethics, are kind of out the window.
We should say, we didn't say, I'll actually pull up the book for reference on this. When you mentioned fighting them in the fighting pits, we should say that there is 4 distinct bloodlines that are left over from the ancients that settled this world, right? And this is why. So, one of the reason why Nona ended up where she is, at least the first part, because I'm not going to give that away, is that they live in these hostile conditions and people sell off their children. Like, think of it almost like the Great Depression when you hear those stories of people selling their children. It's awful. Yeah. But they're not just selling them because they need the money and they can't feed them. It's also because there's the possibility, and it's not always visible, that these children might possess some of the ancient lines. And that is Durant, Hunska, Marjal, and Quantal. And they have different things about them that set them apart. Some of it's speed, ability to tap into magic, ability to walk the path, and then distinguishable by size, things like that. So they try to find these children. It's like a merchant, like a child merchant, goes and buys up children that they think, based off like their eye shape or their size, might possess these qualities. And then they use these children as fighters, or they sell them off to the academia because they possess the ability to have like great intelligence, or to the convent because they think like this person has this type of magic, they'd be great, like a great poison sister or whatnot. So that's kind of one thing that we left out, but that's why they're fighting. That's part of the reason Nona's ended up where she is she possesses qualities that this person buying up children thinks she might have.
Yeah, and each of these forms of magic, essentially due to these bloodlines, a person could have a little bit of multiple, or they could be mostly one. Whereas your normal person basically doesn't really have any of these qualities visible. But there's different people that want these people. So just because one bloodline is good at magic, there's different organizations that want those children that are capable of doing magic. So the church is one. There's also a religious like university that teaches magic to these kids, and they're all kind of trying to recruit, and the recruiting is done by these kind of headhunters in the almost literal sense. They're just driving through the countryside buying children.
It's complex, and that's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes it so fun to read. And I actually think that this is the part where we're probably the safest of spoilers. We've been spoiler free pretty much so far. We'll try to be safe through the rest of it, but as we talk about things we dislike and such, we might get into some of that. I have one more thing I want to add in terms of what I loved about the book, and then I'm ready to go into dislikes after that. Up to you. But my
Okay.
last thing I wanted to add is that the conclusion of this book takes 100 pages. It's about 100 pages, and you realize you're getting to the conclusion, and you realize you got a chunk of book like left. And I have not had that for so long. Especially some of these books really try to cliffhanger it. They really try to pick up the pace, and you're pinching just a couple pages, and you're like, "There's no way, there's no way, don't do this to me." And this book, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a real ending. I'm gonna see it. I'm gonna watch this unfold." And I didn't see everything that was coming. And that's nice. But like, oh my gosh, you guys, anybody craving a real ending? And this book keeps going. There's more. So
Yeah.
good.
I couldn't agree more with what you said. But you mentioned you have some criticisms or things that maybe weren't your favorite elements. I,
I mean, we have to do that, right? Like we spent a good chunk of the show talking about what we liked, and I think that's because I liked more than I disliked. But if
okay.
we're gonna start where we disliked, let's pick an easy one. And you mentioned the setting, and you described it in such a great way. Like, I feel like you need to go write that online somewhere for people to read who are reading this book, because it was great. Because I could not get into the setting. And I knew that there was like these big tall walls. They mentioned like 2 mile tall walls of ice on either side of them. So they're basically in this like canyon of ice, but they can live in the middle of it. And my brain had a hard time with it, mostly because there was still farming, there's still agriculture. They did mention the soil's difficult, like the river had changed the course of the landscape a few different times, and some
Yeah.
spots were rougher still because the river had
And
done it more
yeah,
recently.
and there's like parts where the ice had come into the valley a bit and then been pushed back out by the moon's
Mm.
focus, and what was left behind it had like scratched all the soil away, and all that's left is just bedrock in certain places. And so there's no farming that can happen there. It's not even really good for cities because it's just hard rock stone.
So I struggled with that though, because there
Okay.
was farming, right? Like she mentioned her mom being out in the fields farming something. I want to say it was like peas or something. I can't remember. So there's areas where it's habitable enough. There's some agriculture. They're mostly catching fish. They're mostly eating protein, it seems like. But I got taken out of the book. This is the only times this has happened. There's like 2 times, but this is one of the major times. Each time they talked about the setting, especially because it feels like at one point they're in a desert. It's super sandy. They have these ice storms and like sands blowing everywhere. And I'm like, okay, we got some desert. We're basically on like a sand dune, but yeah, we got ice walls. And my brain had a hard time. And this is where these are moments in books that make me feel dumb, and that's not a bad thing. But I'm like, okay, I need to understand the setting. I couldn't do it. And you know how I love to picture my books like movies in my head. And I could picture the characters like to a T, I think. I pulled up the wiki and I see the characters and I'm like, yep, that's exactly, oh my gosh, that's how it was in my brain. The setting, no,
Okay.
rough for me.
So for me, what I struggled with a little bit was at the start of this book, our main character, Nona, is 8 years old. And then there's a roughly 2 year time jump to the second part, half of the book. And some time occurs during that. We're not sure how much time occurs, but we're talking, a whole span of time from 8 to 11 years old. And the way people treat these children, sometimes I really struggle to find to be believable. and yes, I know that's part of the setting, and this is the way dystopian settings tend to work. But you're already in a world that it's tough to survive, and this kind of, it's almost wasteful for the danger they were using. I don't know. It's I struggled a little bit with this one, that like the way they were treating like an 8-year-old didn't feel very realistic, as far as like they were expecting this 8-year-old to be able to fight an adult. And it was like, that doesn't even make any sense. And I struggled a little bit. Now you throw in this 8-year-old has magical super speed, that helps, but it's not that big of an advantage.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head of one of my biggest issues with this book. And it's actually, I think, an issue of Mark Lawrence in how he writes children. And I didn't realize it was an issue that I had with the book that wouldn't burn until I read this one. And then I'm seeing the theme of how he writes. I don't think he writes youth very well at all. And I'm not picking on it, because I really enjoyed this book. But when I read about I read up on the author a bit, because I'm like, what is going on with this author? And he's quite distinguished, and PhD in mathematics at the Imperial College of London. Has worked on a ton of research products and decision reasoning and theory. Oh my gosh, dude's smart. So I just feel like he has a bit of a disconnect with children. I don't know why, but writing perspectives of youth. The first chapters of the book that wouldn't burn, like, it's this youth in the desert again. She sees, like, she's staring deep into a well and thinking about theories of life. Like, even then I'm like, what the heck? And so I just wanted the kids to come across more. And I know that they're in this dystopian world. I get it, like you do. Like, they're rough, they're hard, but like, they're still kids. And I think it would have made it real at more moments, as some of these kids are getting poisoned and their bones are turning into mush. Like, serious Harry Potter stuff, like you said, now that I'm connecting it. But like, they'd cry. Like, I just felt like there'd be more like snot nose rubbing, and especially at age 8.
Well,
I don't know.
And also maybe things where they were like, there'd be a lot more playfulness and that kind of stuff, especially at that age.
Yeah.
I think I found myself essentially just aging up everyone in this book to at least
teenagers.
At least teenagers. I couldn't not do that, and to keep the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah. And then I think someone who's read this before might put in the comments, no, but there's all these moments, and there are. He writes them in there, but I think someone maybe told him to. Maybe I'm being mean. I'm sorry, Mark Lawrence, if you ever watch this, but like, there's moments where it's like, and then she skipped off and she stuck her tongue behind her and went, nanner, things like that. And then, one made a big splash in the pool, and, and I think the attempt was made. It wasn't believable.
Okay. Did you have anything else that maybe was bothering you?
Just one more thing. Well, other than I think Mark Lawrence loves himself great big time, loves to hear himself speak and write, because some of these chapters, I think that's the pacing issue, Rob, because he goes on a bit too long sometimes, and I feel like that's where the pace, I'm like, dude, you really like how you write. So a couple times, but that's minor.
I like how he writes too.
You like how he writes too? I do too. Except for when I don't. And I'm like, dude, you were droning. You're like, you looked back at this and you go, yeah, Mark, that was great. Anyway, okay. But the other thing actually has to do with children too. So like, they're training up these kids to be, Red Sisters, so these like assassins of the nunnery, which is badass and awesome. But like, I dislike, and this happens in a lot of books, I complain about this in the Fourth Wing series, is that like, when children have to go fight a big bad guy, like, there's this one character that's like taken on 20 men or taken on 12 men, and they're like this accomplished assassin, they're scaling buildings, and then the children come up with an evil plot. Like, the plot's happening, they're working through the plot, and you hear things like, maybe we poison her, haha, maybe we stuff her in a barrel and throw her down a cliff, and they're just, that almost felt kiddish, but then they do it, and I'm like, no, you're 10. I couldn't, Rob. I couldn't with those spots. I could when it came to the magic and walking the path and really channeling that deep ancient magic. I can get behind that. I couldn't get behind the childhood classroom, like, we're gonna get her. And then they do moment. I don't know if you know the part I'm talking about, and it just struggled.
Okay.
It was still fun.
Yeah. So if you were to recommend this book, what kind of reader would you kind of recommend this to? Like, who's this book for?
Okay, so two types of people. First off, I greatly encourage my romantic readers who love your Akatars and who love your Crescent Cities and your Fourth Wings to actually jump into this book. We've been talking, you and I, about what solo episode I might do next. And like, I think it's important that we get our like heads out of the gutter sometimes on some of these like steamy, high spice books, and we pepper in some like good solid writing. Like if you love dark academia like a Fourth Wing, if you love dragons and magics, there's no dragons in here yet, that in this book at least, then this is great. Like I think it's important that people step back and try to read something less YA sometimes. Like if you love those books, you will love this book. Now the second side of that is people who already love this type of book. Like, Mistborn is one of my favorite books, and this is kind of along those lines. When I was thinking about Mistborn and the push and the pull and seeing the different threads between like the push and pull objects whenever they've taken that metal, I forget the name of that one, and they can see the thin blue lines. That kind of happens in here when they can see lines from different objects or how the magic is weaved and worked. It's also great for people who are fans of like magic is not for everyone, which I'm not always a fan of that. Like I don't like chosen people get magic as much of the time, but this one made sense. I kind of like where magic is in here and you can find it if you try hard enough or work hard enough. I like a lot of those more. But like, magic is not for all. The chosen ones get it, and there's a reason. This is also people who like the magicians. This is great. Or Sword of Shannara, like you said. Really great books. Anybody who like those. Any epic fantasy, really.
Yeah. One of the things I didn't mention earlier that I liked is that this book takes place pretty much entirely from Nona's point of view. And so there really isn't any like big exposition. You discover this world as she discovers this world. And if you need back information about the past, well, that's handled through either there's a couple flashbacks, or there's a couple spots where Nona is narrating something about her past to other people. And so she's telling a story, and she's kind of, let's call her an unreliable narrator. She doesn't always tell the truth with her stories when she's narrating it. But for the most part, this whole book is told from her point of view. So you get to explore this world as she comes to understand it. And I really like those kinds of stories because it feels so much more immersive. So if you've read books with a ton of exposition and maybe found that not to be your favorite style, this is the kind of book that I talked about when we read some of our more recent books that had a lot of exposition. This is one that's entirely from a character's point of view, and you get to learn about this world in the most natural way. And I think people who like that kind of fantasy, will really enjoy this book. But ultimately, I think who this book is for is anyone who read or watched Game of Thrones and was like, I want a whole book that's about Arya, because that's what this felt like. It felt like almost a send up of that character type, that child, amazing fighter with some cool magic abilities. It's a whole book about Arya.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. You summed that up perfectly. And she like even looks like Arya Stark in my mind and on the wiki. Yes, 100% agree. Warning though, don't get the paperback like we did. I couldn't find the hardback available. If you don't like tiny print, we probably should say that. This is so small. I was just like, oh my God. I have excellent eyesight too. I'm like 2015 and I was struggling. So yeah. Great book.
it did feel at times that maybe they took the normal full-sized book and then just like shrunk the page and did shrink to fit the page, because like the
Yeah,
font's on the small side. And
it is rough.
so I ended up just getting this one as an ebook because I couldn't
Oh, you
I couldn't do it.
cheated.
I couldn't do. I bought the book, but then I looked at it and I was like, oh, I can't.
Yeah, like this is rough, y'all. If this is a book that's available in ebook and you can't find it hardback with bigger pages or bigger writing, then don't do it. It is like, I'm telling you, I have excellent eyesight and I'm like, this sucks so bad. And it makes me wonder, because I often compare books by like size, you know, and I wonder what this would be as a hardback, because it felt longer than it was as it was in this. And I almost feel like I would have read it faster if it was different format. But all right, let's get into spice rating, because we get to skip the map today. There is no map. But oh wait, no, before spice, there's no map, but there is like a bit of a glossary. Talked about it a smidge earlier.
Yes.
Author's note.
Yeah, this introductory chapter at the very beginning, it gives quite a bit of information, such as like the different bloodlines, which they call tribes. It gives a bunch of characters, like high level blurbs about each character and what their names are, and maybe their alternate names, because some of them have multiple names that are used in the book. And while that might feel a little spoilery, it really isn't. It's actually just a really useful tool if you need to be like, well, who was that again? I didn't really find I needed to, but I was really glad it was there.
Yeah. It's funny because I talk about how Mark feels highly of himself, and he's like, all the information here is given to you in the text and unfolds naturally. You don't need this. You can skip it. Only come to it if you need it. But it's like, I felt like I did need it, mostly for the pacing, because like you said, there's moments of time. I mean, 4 years goes by basically, because we know she starts at 8 or 9, 8. Red class is ages 9 to 12. Gray class is ages 13 to 14. We know she hasn't finished gray class, so she's probably at that age 13. So 8 to 13, that's actually more like 5 years. And so there's periods of time where it feels like a lot of time's gone by, but it didn't really talk about it. So it's like, wait, she's in gray class now. How old is she? I'm like, oh, well, she's 13 now. Or 12-ish if she got in there early. Okay. Like, I did come back to this. And also, as you said, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, some of the sisters, they have like a code name. And then they have the name that people call them behind their back, but then there's their real name, which we don't know. So like it tells you that too, especially when someone's like Mistress Shade, but then you hear them say like Sister Apple later, and you're like, is there 2 people in this room now? And then you're like,
Yeah.
oh no, it's the same person. Like,
yeah, because all the sisters take a name, which is just a common everyday object, and then the leader of each class will be like, mistress, or uses the title mistress with whatever the title of their class is. So
yeah,
that gives them a second name. And then, as you mentioned, like there's one called the Poisoner, and that's the children's nickname for her.
yeah. But she's also Mistress Shade, because she teaches the Shade class, but she also has her sister name. So it's just like, wah. So I did use it a lot, and so I thought it was great. I was really, really glad to have it. And no, Mark, I didn't think that I needed to skip it. I think I needed it. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to spice rating. How would you feel the spice level is in this book?
I mean, it's low, but there is some kind of hinted at romantic things, but based on their ages, it's not really expressed. Like there's a couple points where like they mention crushes, and or like 2 girls are sharing a bed inside the
their
convent.
feet are sticking out under the covers, like footsying each other. But like, so yeah, it's like a 1 for me. It was so low, but it is giving hinted at that we probably are going to get more spice. I mean, at least I hope so, in future books, because I could ship a couple of these characters, and I have a feeling it won't be as bad as some of the other books we read where they pass a few characters around. But I think we might be getting some passing around in older books too, because I think some of them have crushes on each other. I did have a small issue with the ages though, where like I didn't think some of the stuff would be happening at the ages it was, but it probably is forced proximity. So like, I didn't like reading about 2 10-year-olds naked in a pool of water and one swimming slowly to the other one trying to get as close to them as possible. That did happen in the book, and I was like, ew, ew, ick, no. So but like it was all like,
But that was all like
yeah,
a same sex, this is
yeah.
a convent, they're just swimming as part of their either recreation or bathing.
Well,
So
she was definitely flirting. Like
yeah.
she was trying to, yeah. So the one's flirting. I'm like, you're 10, and maybe it's because I'm a mom, and I'm like, no, 10-year-olds are sweet, and I'm like, well, who knows? Maybe they're
Uh,
not.
And that might have been one of the things where I just subconsciously just aged everyone up.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't though. And I was trying to age them up, but in those moments, there was a few of them. I'm like, I don't particularly like reading this knowing the age that they are, but it was still all very innocent. And you know what? Little girls can have crushes on each other. It's fine. I just had an issue when they were nude in the bathwater. But overall, Spice is a 1. We hope it gets spicier with a few of these characters who I think would make a great couple.
So the magic, though, how would you rate this as a magic system?
Oh man. Okay, I don't know because it doesn't feel like a system yet so much. I mean, it does. There's different, and I'm going to pull the book for reference, and I think this is good for everybody to see too because it is right here, right? There's different types of paths. And the paths are you can be a bride of the ancestor, a martial sister, sister of discretion, or mystic sister. Now, this is the paths within the convent, right? There's other people who can wield magic outside of the convent. So these are just their paths, but it does talk about the different types of magic. We also know that these paths came from 4 different distinct ancestors, and how they came to this world, and I'm definitely going to say world, it's not our earth, has been a bit lost over time. We know that they came somehow, and we know that they settled, and this was pre like all the ice craziness. So and we know that there's artifacts left over from that ancient time, and we know that these artifacts have magic or are sources of magic or channel magic or something. So it's all explained, it's all there. I did mention earlier preferring that magic could be tapped into by not just people who are chosen, but that's the way the book is written. It's fine. But I do love that. I was wondering, so as these children develop, their magic can start to show, right? Your magic can often show too through pain or forced into your magic. And we've read other books like that too, where you have to like come into your magic because some issue arises you have to overcome. So as some of these characters were maturing, I'm like, ooh, what are they gonna be? What are they gonna be? Are they gonna be Hanska? They're tall, maybe. Are they gonna be Geralt? And then you mentioned that some characters can have more than one line, but it is incredibly rare, like super, super rare. And they talk about this in terms of like full blood, partial blood, and just a pinch. So, and I thought
Yeah.
that just a pinch was cute. Yeah, it's adorable. So like it's all explained, it's all there. I think that it's not as well explained for me as like the Mistborn series, where you have this like this metal does this does this. It's very specific. It's still a bit ambiguous in here, but I do feel like it will get answered. So I was very pleased, actually. I really, really enjoyed, at least from the sisters' point of view, which is all we're getting, how they utilize this magic in the world, or how it can be used, especially with the different, I'm going to call them conduits, if you will, which is the 4 like different types of ancestry.
Yeah, I really agree with this system. It's not quite explained enough so far to really say, oh, I understand the system. There's a lot of elements that are explained here, but because of where Nona is in her education, she's just barely getting into the magic side of her schooling. At the end of the novel, she's very new to that. So she hasn't had enough time to really explore that too much, just enough for it to be entice you and be like, I think there's something really cool here, and it's very distinct. It's a it feels very unique, which always excites me in a magic system. It doesn't feel like just something else with the serial number scratched off. It feels very distinct, and I'm excited about that, especially book 2, which should take place during the age, I would assume, of when they're going to be really leaning into the magic for those that are capable of doing magic.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're in grade class right now. There's 2 books left in this trilogy, and we get Mystic class still and Holy class. Now they covered 2 of the classes in 1 book. So I don't know. I mean, I bought all 3 books because I just bought the trilogy. I had a feeling I was gonna like this. There's a nun like covered in blood on the cover. I'm like, okay. I was so ready for it, Rob. But yeah, if I had to rate this, it's interesting because we've said it's not all figured out yet, but I know it will be. I just know. And I'm gonna give it a 5.
I absolutely agree. I think this is a 5 as far for what you get in this book. There's so much potential, and everything you get is very well explained. You just don't get the full system yet because of where her education is. But there's so much potential there, and the way Mark Lawrence kind of plots out his books, I have no doubt he knew at the beginning of this book exactly how this was going to go, or something very close to how it ended up, because it feels, very solid, even at this early stage. So I think it's safe to say a 5.
2 5s. The only other book I've given a 5 is Mistborn on Magic System. So yeah, I was very, very pleased.
And that makes sense because that's another very distinct and unique magic system. So that's the kind of thing that excites, fantasy readers like us.
We didn't cover this. I'm just going to touch it just a little bit, back to spice rating just a little bit, and also a hint on the magic. There's one moment in the book that I think readers will like, especially that readers who love romantasy will like. And this talks about the magic a bit. With certain types of magic, the sisters who can walk the path, as they say, and this is more of like weaving magic and using magical threads to do certain things, you can actually form like bonded connections. And there's sisters in this book who formed a bonded connection for a very long time. And the connection's not supposed to last very far. Like once you get a certain distance from each other, like it doesn't work as well. But they say this line. Now I'm going to misquote because I'm not reading it from the book, but it was like, I could find her over 1,000 miles. And someone said, really, it's not going to break. You're not going to lose the bond. I will never lose the bond. And I'm like, oh my gosh, for people who love fantasy and romantasy, that is the line. And it's not spice. It's not spice level. It's just that connection level that was added to the book that I was just like, and it involves magic too. And it's like, yes.
And that really comes back to that core theme of this is a book strongly themed around friendship and the bonds of these characters. Yeah. So yeah, that it makes sense that would stand out.
Are we ready to rate it?
Yeah, I'm excited to see how you're going to rate this second outing for Mark Lawrence.
What did I give the first one? I think I gave it like parts of it like a 4 and parts of it were lower. I think I averaged somewhere like I don't remember, but like I didn't hate it, and I remember thinking like maybe I need more time on this. So I have to revisit a little bit the parts of the book I didn't like. I do think Mark Lawrence is like totally full of himself. I don't think I'm ever going to think he's not full of himself. And I do. I think he's full of himself. And so, but you know what? Who's also kind of full of himself that I just love? Brandon Sanderson. So, I feel like I can't bring him down for that. I do have issues with how he writes children, and maybe that's that suspension of disbelief that you mentioned, where I just had to imagine them older. But again, that doesn't knock it down for me. So really, at the end of the day, the issues I had with the book didn't disrupt the story. Didn't make me feel like I can't read. I cannot wait to read the next one, although I might wait because it was heavy. This is a 5, Rob. I'm giving a Rob book a 5. I immensely liked this story. Even when I was texting you parts where I'm like, Mark Lawrence is full of himself.
See, I'm shocked because you were texting me and being like, you had some very strong criticism at that time. But I think that the specific elements of that criticism resolved itself as the book went along. But like so I was I was thinking that you weren't going to like this one, and I'm really happy that you enjoyed it this much. So for me, this is also a 5. This was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed this book. The uniqueness of the story and the elements like the magic system and the almost the sci-fi elements that are kind of peppered into this world just bring it to life and make it feel very real. And it follows one of my favorite kind of narrative styles, which is it's all in character. There's not much in the way of exposition, and I love that in a book. So this is, kind of one of those perfect books for me. So I'm glad you enjoyed it as much.
I did. And I should apologize because I did kind of like bait the line, if you will, a little bit today. I knew what I was doing. I didn't want you to think I was going to like it that much. So earlier when I was messaging you, I was like, oh, they keep doing this. This is 10% of the book now. Why is the author doing this? That was legit. I was just like, ugh, more Mark Lawrence garbo. But then I got to the point today where I'm like, okay, I need to throw Rob off just a little bit. I'm going to type in the Discord like my notes for the call, because when I'm looking at you, I can see my notes underneath you. So I'm like, I can still stare at the camera and not look like I'm reading off screen, but look at my notes. So I was like, oh, I'm just gonna put my notes here, And yeah, no, I knew I was going to give this a 5. I wanted you to think I might not give this a 5. So I got you.
Well done.
Thanks. But you got me too. This really is a strong book. Great job. And I now feel like I know his writing style more. You come to an acceptance with certain types of authors too on their writing style. I might not like part of that, but I love this story. And again, I'm going to kind of talk to some of the new viewers that we have, if they're still watching this video to this point. But when people talk about, oh, I didn't like the writing style of Fourth Wing, I loved the story. And it's like, oh, I didn't like the writing style of, it took 3 books to get into the Throne of Glass series. That's one of my other favorite series. It's true. It takes like 3 books to get in. I don't even know why I made it that long. The writing was shit. But the story was so good. And I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot in YA. I hear that a lot in new adult fantasy. It's like, well, if you just get through the writing, it's great. And this book kind of is like one of those things where you don't have to get through anything. It's a great story the whole time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So before we sign off for today, I just wanted to kind of preview what we're going to be reading in March. And for myself, the book I selected is God Killer by Hannah Kaner. And this appears to be very much a dark fantasy where the gods of this world are actually killable. And heroes are sent out to go slaughter the gods of this world. Now, these might not be your traditional fantasy or real world gods. These might be more like maybe like nature gods or kami or something like that. So just the high level description of this book, I'm excited to see where this one goes. So God Killer.
It's an amazing cover. Like that actually looks similar to the covers in my like new adult series there, Rob. It's beautiful. I'm excited. Okay, so my book is The Serpent and the Wings of Night. And any of you who followed along through the Akatars and the Fourth Wings, I hear you going, yeah, in the background, because yes, this is a romantasy. We're going back. I told you we need to pepper things in. You can't just read romantasy smut all the time, but I can't just read this type of thing all the time, Rob. Like I read through a whole bunch of 10 and 12-year-olds killing soldiers and poisoning people. Like it's getting saved from the gallows. I need my fantasy smut. It's time to bring it back. But with a twist. This is dark romantasy. And I feel like I'm actually starting to like grim dark a little bit if it's grim dark romantasy. So interesting. This author, which is Carissa Broadbent, she was featured for this book series in Grim Dark magazine. So this might just be the best of both of our worlds, because we get romantasy, we get a very well-reviewed book. It's also loved on Book Talk. Who knew? And Grim Dark magazine happens to think that this is one of the better books in that type of series that it's fantastic. It had a really great write-up.
Well, that's that's very exciting. I think March is going to be a send up month if all of this actually pans out.
Yeah, I hope so. So read along with us. We also posted these books over a week ago in the Discord. So Discord finds out sooner. So if you want to know what you're reading, you want to read along with us, make sure to find us there. Also, please like and subscribe. We've had a lot of new people watching our channel, but you know what? We cover other books besides your Fourth Wings and your Onyx Storms, y'all. Check in, take a chance, and read with us and discover books like this.
Thank you all.